What's up, my squids? It's been a while since I've done a solo podcast. I've been keeping the squids well fed with our recent guests. We had Devin, we had Drew Hanlon. I got more guests lined up. I'm keeping the squids well fed. Let's not get that confused. But it has been a while since you and I have had a one-on-one conversation. I like these one-on-ones, right? I like to sit down and stare at you in the face and talk to you. And so today I have a really good topic. Michael Jordan had jumper's knee. You had no idea. I had no idea. And I'm giving you 3 takeaways of why this matters. Now, before I get to that, we do have a required reading for all of our squids, and that is this book right here, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I've been reading this book, and it's unbelievable. When it comes to mental health and enjoying the present moment, this book can change your life. This book is what everybody in society needs to read right now, and that's why it's a required reading for all squids. If you don't read it, your squid card. I'm not going to say that I'm going to remove your squid card because you guys have been rocking with me for, 35 episodes. So I'm not going to remove your squid card if you don't read it, but it is a required reading. Do your homework. I'll be quizzing you guys later. I'm going to read you one quote just so that I can give you guys a little teaser, get you guys hyped enough to go buy it. The mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive. To put it more accurately, it is not so much that you use your mind wrongly, you usually don't use it at all. It uses you. This is the disease. You believe that you are your mind. This is the delusion. The instrument has taken you over. Boom. You are not your mind. You are not your thoughts. A lot of the thoughts that you have roaming around in your head are pointless thoughts from 5 years ago, argument you had 5 years ago and what you should have said, and it is destroying us. It's just constantly there in the back of our mind. It's taking us over. You got to be able to realize that I am not my thoughts. My thoughts are not going to take over me. I got to be able to take a step back and look at these thoughts from an external point of view and say, you do not own me, and laugh at it. Laugh that thought is even still bouncing around in your head, because at the end of the day, all we have is right now. Focus on the now. Don't focus on the past. The future is never guaranteed. Focus on right now. So go buy that book, The Power of Now, and let's get into the actual topic for the day.
You're listening to the PJF Podcast, a show dedicated to decoding elite sports performance and fitness. I'm Paul Fabritz, and I'm an MBA strength and conditioning and performance trainer. If you want to become superhuman, take your fitness, and take your sports performance to the next level, this is the podcast for you. Let's do it.
Michael Jordan had jumper's knee, and I do a lot of studying on the history of the past, history of some of my favorite players, how they move. I study them extensively, and I actually never knew that Michael Jordan had jumper's knee. So that was a fun fact for me. I was listening to Dr. Pete Malarius. I don't know how to pronounce the last name. He was on Jacked Athletes podcast, which is a really good podcast. And he was talking, he made a kind of a one-off comment that, yeah, Michael Jordan had patellar tendonitis, right? We were calling it tendonitis at the time because we still thought that it was just inflammation. We now know that it's tendinopathy. But when I heard him say that, I was like, nah, that can't be. I know that he had problems with the Wizards later on. I know that he was constantly getting his knees drained. But I'm like, you know what? He's 39 years old. That makes sense. He had taken his time off, and we know that what kills the tendons and what kills our joints in general is rapid spike in load. And so obviously if he's going to take some time off and then come back, that could cause some problems. So when I first heard it, that was my initial thought, was maybe during the Wizards days he had pain. Then I went back and did some digging, and I found really credible articles with his teammates weighing in on it, with coaches and doctors talking about it, dating all the way back to the early 90s. So 1991, he was really struggling with right knee pain. So let me actually read you some of the relevant quotes. This is from Chicago Tribune. Michael Jordan has experienced a recurrence of the tendonitis in his left knee. Oh, so his left knee during his Bulls days. I think it was right knee for the Wizards. Left knee that bothered him in last season's playoffs and may have to undergo surgery after this season. Sources close to the Bulls and Jordan confirmed Tuesday. The surgery is said to be minor and would involve removal of a spur. That's an important point. Procedure similar to what John Paxson and Bill Cartwright had after the 89-90 season. So that's interesting. 3 players on the same team around the same time had such bad tendinopathy, tendinitis at the time, that, you're forming that spur. And so a lot of you guys have had this, whether you have Osgood Slaughters or you've had chronic patellar tendinopathy. So at times of high load, or if you spike your workload really quick, a lot of times you will actually notice that the bone grows. So right where that patellar tendon is inserting on the tibia, you'll notice that the bone will grow. And then if you remove the load, sometimes it goes away. But a lot of times when it's chronic, like in MJ's case where he just kept pounding, that spur probably just stayed really big and they wanted to go in and remove it. Like they said, I think it is a minor surgery. But to my understanding, in today's NBA, I think that's pretty rare, and I am not a surgeon. Here's the other thing. I understand that I don't know a lot about what's going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of guys getting surgery in the offseason that you never hear about. And so maybe it is still a common surgery. I don't know. I think that we have such a good grasp on tendinopathies. Not that we have everything figured out. There's a lot to learn still. But I think that we can really manage it so that it doesn't get to the point where we need a surgery. We now know that loading it is really good. We now know that there's certain forms of load that are better than others. Isometrics early on. Look into the Keith Barr work about how he completely healed a tendon, I think, in 18 months. And he talks about the concept of stress shielding, where essentially when you have a problem inside the tendon learns how to send stress, send forces around that part. And so that part never heals. You just build a bunch of tissue around it. And so that's the concept that Jill Cook brings up of, fix the donut, not the hole. And whether that's our only option, I don't know. But I know that a lot of the researchers are saying you can build some really good tissue and stay healthy, even though you do have that problem. Anyways, the point I was making was Keith Barr did a case study, and a case study is only one person, but he did it on a player going into the NBA. So going through the pre-draft process and all that, they did an MRI at day 1 and then again at month 18, I believe it was. Don't quote me on that. But essentially what they did was a lot of isometrics. So he did this entire isometric protocol. He did his collagen, or I believe for that study they used gelatin, but we're getting similar amino acids out of that. They did it an hour before. I think it's 15 grams of gelatin. I think it was like 225 milligrams of vitamin C. In his previous work, he used, I think, less, but it doesn't matter. Either way, they took care of the nutritional side, and then they prioritized isometrics. And the way that he describes it is eventually the tendon starts to relax. And so then you can actually get stress through the injured area and kind of lay down collagen along those lines and essentially heal that part. And so at the end of the 18 months, they showed that it completely healed the tendon itself. So there is still debate. Are we always going to have the pathology, and are we just going to build around it and be perfectly fine and healthy and strong that way, which is very possible? Or can we actually heal the pathology itself? Now, at that time, I don't think either of those debates were going on. At that time, I don't even think they understood that it was a pathology. I think they just thought that it was tendinitis. And so the doctors were probably telling him inflammation, ice, maybe stretch, right? The things that, unfortunately, if you go to a doctor who's not educated or only was educated back in college and hasn't kept up with their continuing education, a lot of times they'll still tell you that, right? But good researchers, good therapists, good strength coaches, we all know that load is good for the tendon as long as it's done the right way. Anyways, back to the article. So then it says, Jordan was assured the problem should not affect his ability to perform, and he has been as effective as ever in the exhibition games, despite admittingly not coming into camp in complete shape, which experts say might have exacerbated the tendinitis. Absolutely. You come in out of shape, and all of a sudden, like I said, you ramp up the workload. Maybe he wasn't playing much. Maybe he wasn't working out much. And then all of a sudden training camp hits. That is the classic case of where tendinopathies start. Or for a lot of you young hoopers, you're not doing much. You take 3 weeks off. Maybe you're working out and doing some skills training, and then you go play 4 games. Boom. Huge spike in workload. I'm actually amazed that any hooper makes it out of their AAU days without any tendinopathies. Like, that shows how durable the body really is. But with AAU, we're getting these huge spikes in workload because it's not like the AAU tournament directors are like, hey, day 1, you only play 1 game, and then next week you play 2 games, and then next week you play 3 games. It's just like nothing to all of a sudden you're playing 4 games. And I think that's where a lot of the tendinopathies come, especially because when you really dive into the research, as Jill Cook would say, I believe she says it is a young man's injury. So it's way more common in men than women. And it's way more common in young athletes, so young jumping athletes. Can you get it in other ways? Yes, but it's mostly those spring forces. When the tendon has to rapidly store and release elastic energy, that's when we get it. And we can get it in the weight room as well. It's a little less common, but you do see it in like Olympic weightlifters, power lifters. If you're like doing anything max intent in really low positions, you see people always pushing full range of motion. If you're going full range of motion really heavy, that's a lot of load on a stretched tendon, right? And that can cause it. Bouncing out of the bottom, so Olympic lifting movements where you're getting in that really deep knee flexion and we're trying to move fast out of the bottom. I've never seen heavy loads at partial ranges or half ranges cause any problems, but full ranges is typically where you see more of the anterior knee pain. Jordan had hoped the problem would disappear with rest in the summer, but it flared up again early in training camp. So that's really interesting. So he probably had it the previous season, and then doctors told him to rest. And so he probably took the entire off season completely off, rested, and then thought it was going to go away. And I can almost guarantee you, because this is what's happening to a lot of young players now, is when the doctor tells them rest, ice, inflammation, they do it. Guess what happens? They feel better. Why? Because they removed the load. It's not a secret that we can get you feeling better with rest. Now, the problem is the tendon decreases capacity. So now you can just go out for a jog and all of a sudden it starts hurting again, let alone talk about getting back into jumping, let alone talk about getting back into playing basketball. And so you drop the capacity of the tendon. And so now even really light exercise can flare up that tendon. And so Jordan was probably told, hey, rest, take it easy. And that's why he came into camp that year out of shape, not because he's lazy, but because he thought that rest would be good for him. And that just made it worse because now he's ramping back up into playing basketball, and that's just going to wreak havoc on the tendon. Yeah, the first noticeable effects of Jordan's tendonitis occurred last season in the playoff series against the Philadelphia 76ers. Okay, so it came on late, maybe overuse. He's playing a lot. He's in the playoffs. Overuse, it starts, it gets bad, summer comes, rest the entire time. Worst thing you can do. Luckily, we now know that that's the worst thing you can do. He was seen limping on the court from the effects of the tendonitis, which that's when you know your tendinopathy is really bad, when you're limping on the court. When it affects your play, it's really bad because a lot of us have tendinopathy, right? But when you get warmed up and you get that adrenaline in the game and you get focused and your mind gets lost in the game, pains go away. Man, if it's minor, if it's even a moderate level of tendinopathy, you're not going to feel it while you're playing. You're usually going to feel it after you cool down. You're going to feel it on the long car rides when you're in deep knee flexion, that type of stuff. Now, one thing that I've always found with tendinopathy, and this is actually supported with Dr. Ebony Rio's research, is there's such a huge mental component to tendinopathies. So here's an example. Athlete A has a tendinopathy, athlete B has a tendinopathy. Let's say it's the same exact level. Athlete A feels it, he's in debilitating pain. Athlete B has no idea that he even has a tendinopathy. That's how it works. It's a brain thing, it's a nerve thing. So sometimes you have it and you don't feel it. There's people that probably developed it in adolescence. You developed it maybe in AAU ball when you were 13 years old. and you might not feel it until you're 21. All of a sudden, something happens, you overload it and you feel it. You might not have developed it then. Michael Jordan might not have developed it during that series or during that season. It might have happened earlier, and sometimes you don't feel it for a long time because that's how complex pain really is. It's not straightforward, especially when it comes to tendinopathies. Now, side note, I'm not a doctor. Talk to your doctor, talk to your physical therapist about whether you should be trying to play through tendinopathies. In my experience, I've seen that a lot of players play through it successfully, and as long as you're managing load and doing your work, keeping it strong in the weight room, doing your isometrics, all that good stuff, they tend to be fine. That tends to not be a career ruiner. But if you're feeling it in games, like Michael Jordan is feeling it in games to the point where he's limping, that's a bit scary, right? That's where that could turn into a full patellar tendon rupture, in my opinion. The article then talks about Jordan's only 28. He's played just 7 seasons. He's already logged 20,000 minutes, many under extreme duress as a high-flying acrobatic player. So that's a good point. They're pointing out that he's acrobatic. It's his style. He jumps high, he decelerates fast, he changes direction. You're going to be at a higher risk. Does that mean you're going to get injured? No. But you're going to be at a higher risk when you're putting more force in the ground, you're absorbing more force upon landing, and you're decelerating, and the more dynamic you are, the higher risk it is. Okay, and this is something that I've talked about a lot in previous posts about when I went back and studied players of the 70s. Well, because of shoes, because of rules, and because people just weren't that athletic in the 70s, sorry to say, in basketball, we weren't that athletic. Play style was very different. The feet were always under the shoulders. Occasionally, the feet would go outside the shoulders. But, in those shoes, if you go too far outside the shoulders, you're going to slip. Right? And so these Kemba Walker type decels, these Michael Jordan type change of direction where the feet get really wide to create those good shin angles, those didn't really happen. It was very, very rare. I saw one person, and that was Nate Archibald, who would actually play with some decent shin angles and play in some wider stances. He had the best agility at the time. He did end up tearing his Achilles. But overall, if you go back, you watch like a Jerry West, legendary player, the movement skills were nowhere near where they would be today. The movement skills were similar to like a 3-and-D guy in today's game, where they're not expected to make really shifty moves. They're not expected to constantly be jumping. They're not a slasher. They're not a Kemba Walker, a Kyrie, constantly changing directions, pounding on the knees. So that's something that we talked about in the Devin Williams podcast. He was like, look, the best thing I can do for my knees is develop a shot. And so sometimes it is being able to switch up your play style to not take away from your dynamic abilities, but make it easier, right? I know a lot of guys who can dunk, and in games, they don't dunk. I know a lot of guys who can throw down really, really good, impressive dunks, and they just lay it up in games because they're like, 1, it's not worth my energy, and 2, it's not worth my knees. I would rather save my knees for defense instead of trying to go all out and do this dunk, right? So that's something that people got to keep in mind is play style really matters. Okay, now I'm going to wrap this all up because you're like, wait, why are you giving me all this information? Why are you ranting about an injury from 1991? Well, I have 3 main takeaways for you, okay? Takeaway number 1, I'm going to read you this section of another article. This is about when Jordan had knee pain later on. Hurts like hell sometimes, really hurts, Michael Jordan told his friends, but, he snapped, who doubted he could play through tendinitis? When hadn't he played through anything? No one knows me like me, he said. You think about the flu game. You think about all the situations he's had. He's had a lot of pain throughout his career that other players simply wouldn't play through. Here's a quote from the physician that worked with him with the Bulls. If you push too fast and inflame the joint, you need to back off or you'll have problems, said Jordan's former physician with the Chicago Bulls, John Hefferon. Now, that does not mean complete rest, right? What that means is, and what he's saying is true, you do need to back off. You should probably be backing off of what's causing the pain. The problem is that doesn't mean full rest. That means let's load it in a way that doesn't make the pain worse, but we can still maintain the strength in the tendon. We got to keep the capacity up. The article goes on to say that John Hefferon had unsuccessfully sought to persuade Jordan to cut his playing time. Michael has plans to get back to make the playoffs. He'll want to push through, as always. Then it says with the Wizards, he did end up having a knee surgery, and it looks like it was a meniscus surgery. The knee was constantly swelling up. His teammates were commenting on how big the knee would get in every game. They would come in and drain it, and his teammates are just talking about, like, why are you doing this to yourself? And to Jordan, this was like completely normal. So the point that I'm trying to make is a lot of durability, right? As trainers, it's a lot of what we're studying. We're studying what players are staying healthy and what are they doing to stay healthy. But one of the biggest things that you're missing is a lot of times two athletes are in the same amount of pain with the same knee condition or the same Achilles tendinopathy, whatever it is, and one plays and one doesn't. And then as trainers and sometimes as players, right, in the social media age, we're like, well, they stayed healthy. I want to do what they're doing. Well, they're a warrior, right? I've worked with some of the most durable players in today's NBA. Statistically, the most games played. And do they train right? Yes, for the most part. Do they stay healthy and steer clear of catastrophic injuries, non-contact injuries? Yes. And that's a huge part of the battle. But there are contact injuries, there is pain, there is some ankle sprains, and they just keep going. Now, I'm not telling you as an athlete that you should be playing through injuries, but basketball is painful, right? There's a lot of sports. Football is even more painful, but basketball, we're taking constant pounding. So even if you do everything right, there's still going to be some pain. Right? And so some people are warriors, and some people, as soon as they feel any pain, they sit out. And then as trainers and as observers, we sit back and we're like, oh, that person's always injured and that person's always healthy. I'm going to do what that person's doing. You might be cheating off the wrong person's homework, right? It might not be what they're doing in training. It might not even be their movement patterns that's keeping them healthy. They might just be a warrior. So to wrap that up, durability through your career is going to come down to a lot of different things. Your alignment matters. Your movement patterns matter. Your conditioning matters, right? Injuries happen when we're tired. Your nutrition, your stress, all these things matter. But one of the top factors, how tough are you? What is your pain tolerance? Jordan's pain tolerance was extremely high, whereas the average player's pain tolerance might be really low. And so that is a huge factor in durability. Again, I'm not saying go play through everything. Take care of your injuries. You got to know the difference between pain and actual injuries. You got to know the difference between minor pain that you actually can play through and pain that is going to lead to something worse. There's certain times where you play on a stress reaction in your foot and it's only going to get worse, right? So you got to really do your studying and learn what injuries are going to get worse if I play on it, and what injuries can I just focus on load management but still get through season with. My takeaway number 2 is in line with what I just said. Specifically, this is for trainers who are sitting back and observing and saying, this person played this many games and they stayed healthy, and so you got to do what they're doing. And then they cherry pick. And this happens all day with social media. I just saw a player went down with a tendinopathy. He's sitting out with the tendinopathy. And, you know, there's trainers posting about it of what he did 2 summers ago. The trainer that he was working with trained him the wrong way 2 summers ago, right? And that's what's leading to his Achilles tendinopathy, even though there's thousands of factors, right? But they praise Jordan. Why? Because social media wasn't around at that time. So these articles, even though they were credible, they were not a big deal, right? It's not something that we all heard about and that every trainer would freak out about. Whereas today, if a star player has a tendinopathy and they sit out because of it, it goes viral. And then people start throwing people under the bus. Oh, it's the training. Oh, it's this, it's that. You don't know. You don't know unless you're on the inside. Unless you're in that player's circle, it's really hard to sit back and make assumptions. And if you are going to make assumptions, at least be accurate. Don't say this person trained wrong and Michael Jordan did everything right, and you got to be like Michael Jordan, but you didn't do your research. You didn't find out that Jordan was probably in more pain than this guy. Jordan pushed through a lot of pain in his playing career. He was a warrior. Great alignment, great movement patterns. I don't know if he trained much. Obviously, he sat out an entire summer, so training probably wasn't perfect, but the dude was a warrior. So don't make assumptions as a trainer, because the reality is you don't know anything. And takeaway number 3, and this might be the most important takeaway for athletes, don't take an entire summer for rest, right? Jordan had the tendinopathy late in the playoffs, and then he was probably told to rest the entire summer. And at that time, that was probably the best science-based evidence. And so that was the thing to do. So he did it. And then he probably felt better. There's a lot of methods when it comes to pain, especially tendinopathies, where there's a honeymoon phase, because you removed what was stressing it. And now you're sitting on the couch and you're icing, you're resting, you're elevating, whatever it is that you're doing, you're not getting the load. And that's why it feels better. Feeling better does not mean that it's actually healing. You're just removing the thing that exacerbated it in the first place. A lot of times I'll hear from a player, yeah, I did this protocol and I feel great. And then I dive deeper into it and it's like, oh, you're severely undertrained, right? You didn't load. You didn't do any plyometrics. You didn't sprint. You didn't jump. You didn't cut. And so you're not getting better and you're not becoming actually more durable for the sport. You just removed fast loading and you're strengthening only at slow speeds. And so, yeah, you're going to feel better because you took away the number one reason for jumper's knee, and that's storing and releasing elastic energy rapidly. And so we can get that honeymoon phase where you feel good, but getting back into sports, that's the real test. Can you get back into sports and stay pain-free for multiple years after that program? So that's takeaway number 3. Don't rest it. You got to load it. You got to have a gradual ramp up from your isometrics to your slow, heavy strength training, to your more power strength training, to your low-level plyometrics, to your more intensive plyometrics, to your multi-directional plyometrics and agility, to your reaction-based agility and plyometrics, and then into your sport, okay? And all of this stuff has to be properly progressed. Trust me, I got something crazy coming for you guys. We've got some of the best researchers in the game, some of the best physical therapists in the game, working on something to help you guys out, because there needs to be standards. There's no standards when it comes to jumper's knee right now, and that's why it's the wild, wild west. Everybody just comes up with different theories, but there is a way where we can standardize it with an objective-based system, and we can progressively overload so that we can drastically reduce the risk of jumper's knee. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in to today's podcast. Be sure to leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We would really appreciate it. I love giving out this information. I love keeping the squids well fed. I know you guys are hungry. I know you guys want to learn, and I want to provide the best information that I can for you. But I need to grow. I need to reach new people. And so if you want to share it, please share it. If you want to leave us a review, that helps us. Leave us comments, thumbs up on all our videos. I really appreciate it. I want to keep feeding the squids. Until next time, I'm out.